know what the situation is like where you work. If you are considering a 4-day week, if you would like your organization to consider a 4-day week. And I think we will make a start. Great, excellent. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this lovely Thursday morning. I'm Stella. I'm the Partnerships Director here at Forward Action. I think most of you on the call know who we are. I'm recognizing some names. Lovely to see some of you. But for those of you who don't know, we are a digital mobilization agency. We partner with progressive causes, and together we create strategies and we deliver campaigns and we develop tools, all of which drive supporters take action for meaningful change. Today we are joined by Jessie. You will see that it says Alicia on her Zoom screen. That's not right, but this is Jessie Hayes, one of our brilliant digital strategy managers here at Forward Action. Jessie will be helping to keep things running today behind the scenes. I'll do just a tiny bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our speakers. So if you have any questions, please post them in the Q&A. We will be collecting them. There will be plenty of time at the end to ask those questions to our speakers. If you have any tech issues, let us know in the chat, or you can also message us, Jessie and me as the hosts, and we'll do our best to fix it. So if you can't hear anything, or if the screen is appearing too small or anything like that, just let us know. And closed captions should be enabled, so you should be able to use them. If you don't want to see them, you can switch them off as well. But again, if you have any issues with that, let us know. All right. So today we'll be talking about the 4-day week. This is a popular topic at the moment. I know lots of different organizations are talking about it here in the UK, and you will be hearing from Alex Lloyd-Hunter and Joe Escalante-Coney, the two co-founders of Forward Action, and I would say the architects of the 4-day week here at Forward Action. We have been trialing it since January, and we're very, very excited to share how we went about it with you all this morning. So I will be turning my camera off and handing over to Alex, and I hope you enjoy this webinar.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Stella, and thank you everyone for joining us bright and early on Thursday, or as the Forward Action team have started calling it, a Thriday. I've been trying to introduce the terminology of a 3-ken to follow the Thriday, but it's been met with probably at best sort of pitying indifference by the team. So to be honest, I've given up, but it's a 3-ken soon. So what we're going to cover today, fairly straightforward, just a bit of background to the 4-day week and the case for it, and then run through our experience trialing it, why we did it, how we went about it, how it went, and then any lessons that we've taken from it that might be relevant for other organizations, including anyone on the call who is themselves a leader at an organization thinking about trying this, or perhaps you want to make the case in your organization and you're looking for ways to do that. So hopefully some useful lessons there, and then lots of time for questions at the end. So to give you a bit of background to the 4-day week and the kind of case for it, I imagine this is familiar to most of you who joined the call, but just to recap quickly, what we mean by a 4-day week is essentially working 4 days for 5 days work of pay. So it's not the same as part-time, where you would work 4 days but only get 80% of your salary. And it's not the same as compressed hours, because your hours reduce to match the number of days you're working. You're not fitting 5 days worth of hours into 4 days. You're doing 4 days worth of hours in 4 days, but for full-time pay. And to look at the rationale behind this, I actually think it's quite a useful starting place to look at the 5-day week and the history of that. So it's so obviously normal and seems like it's been around forever, but it's actually easy to not realize that it's a relatively modern invention. And before that, people usually worked 6 days a week and only had Sundays off. So we've got a little poll to get things going, which I think you'll be able to answer in, it should pop up in Zoom. When was a 5-day week first widely adopted in the US and UK? So 1810s, 1840s, 1880s, 1900s, or 1930s.
I'm seeing the live voting as it comes in. It's really interesting. Okay, so I think most people have voted now. Okay, so the majority says 1930s, and quite a few people, about 24%, say 1900s. with smaller numbers in the 1800s.
Okay, very good. You're all cleverer than I am. It was the 1930s. When I first started researching this, assumed it would be much earlier than that, but it was only, in fact, in the 1930s. And Henry Ford is often seen as a real driver of this. So he was a pioneer, obviously, of the production line, his Model T Ford, and he just invented a way to make cars very quickly and efficiently. And he used this increased productivity in 1926 to give his employees Saturdays off. And for him, this was both partly an altruistic thing, in that he believed in the kind of inherent moral value of leisure, but also that he wanted to use it to increase productivity. And interestingly, he thought it would be a wider boost for the company in terms of boosting the US economy, because his employees would have more time to go out, spend money, which would boost the economy, which in turn boost his company, which is quite an interesting perspective. And in the UK, interestingly enough, Boots, the shop that's still around today, was an early pioneer of this. So they similarly opened a new factory in 1933, and found that their productivity went up so much as a result that they could create the same amount of products in 5 days as they were doing in 5.5 before. So they gave their employees Saturdays off as a trial. And what they found was productivity went up and absenteeism went down. So they had fewer people off sick because they were having more time off. And so they made it a company-wide policy in 1934. I think what's interesting about looking at the 5-day week is that there are a lot of mirrors in what the people who tried it found and the case that was made for trying it, with the argument today for a 4-day week. So these are some of the key principles that people who argue for a 4-day week put forward: that it will increase, having extra time off will increase people's energy and therefore productivity and efficiency at work. So it should be possible to do the same amount of work in 4 days as you can in 5. That it will lead to better health, both mental and physical, which of course leads to lower absenteeism, so fewer people taking time off sick. And on this, one of the things that I found researching this that I liked the most was the concept of Saint Mondays, which were a thing in the 17th and 18th century, where because people only had 1 day off on Sunday, it was quite common in some industries for people just to basically get really pissed on Sunday and then not come to work on Monday. And that was a sort of normalized thing as a way of getting a 2-day weekend, even though you weren't really meant to, and you were kind of drunk on the second day. But obviously having more time off reduces the need to spend your 1 day getting blind drunk. Fourthly, people argue it's a better fit for modern work patterns. So particularly a 5-day week came in at a time when you would typically have fathers going to work and mothers staying at home looking after children. It's much more common, obviously, now to have both parents working. And the 5-day week, for anyone who is a parent, makes that quite challenging. Equally, as a lot of us, I think, will experience in our jobs, modern work, particularly work that's based around communications and computers, has a lot of very intense stimulation, a lot of overload from messaging, a lot of increased burnout as a result. And actually giving people that extra time off is a better fit for what the shape of modern work is. It's difficult for the human brain to deal with five straight days of that kind of overstimulation that comes from electronic communication often. And finally, the kind of bigger macro argument in the economic side is a question around how we should share the benefits of productivity over time, but we're constantly improving our productivity, often through technology, advancing technology. And I think this is particularly relevant at the moment because, of course, the prominence of AI and the conversations about how that is going to disrupt the labor market. I think there's a question there that if we can harness AI to increase productivity, and that may lead to fewer jobs, is there an opportunity here to actually reduce the working week and use some of that productivity that's created to give people more leisure time? And in fact, interestingly, the advent of the 4-day week, off the back of those gains in productivity, was being predicted by quite senior US politicians back in the 1950s. So this is a quote from one senior politician saying, "We see the time not too far distant when we can have a 4-day week. And these are not dreams or idle boasts, they're simple projections of the gains we've made in the last 4 years." And I was surprised to find that this quote was none other than hero of the progressive left, Richard Nixon. So there you go. Stock clock can be right occasionally. And he was, in fact, right in that prediction around increases in productivity gains. So this is a graph showing GDP per capita over time, which is a crude metric of essentially the kind of prosperity or wealth per individual in a country. Today in the United States, it's 20 times higher than it was in 1960. In the UK, despite that little Brexit-shaped blip over here, it's 30 times higher. So the argument is that productivity has increased so significantly since a 5-day week was brought in that we can actually use some of that productivity combined with the benefits and efficiency that come from having a 4-day week. We can use that to give people a 4-day week. So that's the kind of macroeconomic argument behind this. Okay, so that's the background and the theory. So on to our experience and why we decided to trial it. So we first decided that we actually wouldn't be able to do it. That was our first instinct. So like all the best ideas, it wasn't ours. It actually first came from some Forward Action team members who brought it to Joe and I early 2022. Jesse, who's facilitating the call, was one of those, and Beth and Foppe as well in our team. If you have done any work with them, was their initial suggestion. And it was prompted by, you may have read about a UK-wide trial that happened in the second half of last year. And Joe and I were really keen that we do this in principle. Part-time working has always been part of what Forward Action offers. Right from the beginning, everyone's had the opportunity to do 4 days a week if they want to in their role, no questions asked, but with the resulting pro rata pay cut. And what we saw is that those who essentially could afford to do that were choosing to do that. So the entire of the leadership team was 4 days a week, and they're reporting real benefits in doing that. But those who were perhaps more junior and on lower salaries, who felt that they couldn't afford to take that pay hit, were locked out of those benefits. And that's something that didn't sit particularly right with us, and is something that we were keen to address with this. But we just thought in practice, a consultancy like us couldn't make it work, because ultimately we sell time. That's what we do. We do a certain amount of work for our partners. It takes a certain amount of time, and that's what we have to sell. And so we assumed that if we had 20% fewer days, that means we had 20% less time, which meant we'd have to put our prices up to our partners by 20%, which was something we were just not prepared to do. So we, at first glance, thought this wasn't possible. And then 3 months later, we changed our minds, and Joe is going to explain why.
Yeah, so we went from thinking in April that the 4-day week would jeopardize the future of the company, which may be where some of you, if you're organizational leaders, might be at the moment, to in August, just a few months later, telling the team that we wanted to trial the 4-day week. So what changed? So the big underlying reason that we changed our mind and decided to go for the trial is that we were looking to move the business to employee ownership, and we wanted to leave it in as good a condition as possible, which meant addressing 3 key complex issues that we found at the heart of the organization. The first was making sure that our awesome team stayed with the business, stayed with the organization as we transitioned ownership. We've always had being a great place to work as being one of our core goals for Forward Action, but we could see coming out of the pandemic that there's some lingering burnout within the team, and we felt our options for addressing that were actually quite limited. The levers that we had to pull were quite limited. Yeah, so that was one of the areas we wanted to address. The second was that we had a complex structure which we wanted to address before leaving the business. I'll show you a diagram of this later on, but as the organization had grown, to recognize specialisms, we created separate teams for things like creative and strategy, and within that, different layers. And that had in effect created silos. And these silos and specialisms meant that even simple changes to partner pages or ads required quite a lot of process and lots of coordination between teams. I think we've got here an example where an edit to Facebook ad takes 14 steps and 5 staff members to weigh in on. So it can be quite wasteful. It also meant that resource planning was done centrally by me. It became horrendously complex and time consuming to try and match 20 different people with work coming in. And it also meant that any coordination issues between different teams, different silos, different specialisms got raised to senior leaders, which meant that people in those places couldn't take the initiative, and we had quite a lot of process to try and work around that as well. Yeah. The final thorny issue that we wanted to try and address before we left was that as we've grown the organization, we'd sort of held on to all of the responsibility for financial sustainability. That needed a new home within the business, but we wanted to make sure that that context and that responsibility was spread out around the team, because we felt it would mean that better decisions were made up and down the organization, rather than us just handing over that responsibility to whoever was directly replacing us. So to just recap on those three key issues: that keeping our great team and addressing burnout, addressing silos and centralized decision making, which is quite wasteful, and spreading ownership of organizational goals and success. So all held together, we felt that we needed to have like a cultural and structural shift within the organization to empower the team and sort of free them to take more ownership. And we felt that the 4-day week would allow us to address those issues in one go. So the transition to the 4-day week would allow us to address those issues. In the short term, we felt it would create a huge incentive for team members to help us make those changes, help us address those issues. And in the longer term, we felt that the higher staff retention would give stability that we needed to transition leadership. So those were addressing those big issues were the motivation for trialing the 4-day week, but it's not really talked about how we've addressed that financial concern that we had in April 22, which I'll come on to now. Agency Finance 101. As Alex said, as an agency, we essentially sell time. We have billable time, which is work on projects for our wonderful partners, and we have internal time, and that's stuff on stand-ups or socials. And the amount of revenue that we can earn to be financially sustainable is driven really by how much billable time that we have within the organization. So our calculations in April 2022 were, when we first said no to the 4-day week, was that if we had 20% less billable time, we just couldn't have 20% less revenue. It just wouldn't work. The organization wouldn't be able to sustain that. So, which is why we said no. But what we came to realize when we actually thought about it and thought, okay, we want to address these three big issues, how can we make it work? We tried to work out how we could do the same number of billable hours, working 4 days instead of 5. And the way that we came to that is that if everyone did an extra billable hour per day on average, that would allow us to move to 4-day week and still maintain the same level of income. And that gave us a really clear requirement for making the 4-day week work. And we just needed to figure out how to get that one extra billable hour per day per person. And then we went into preparing for it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. Okay, so we ran ahead of launching the trial. We did around 4 or 5 months worth of preparation, and we had 4 goals for this. The first was how to achieve that financial goal that Joe's just set out. How do you get that extra billable hour per day without asking people to work an extra hour per day? So how do we achieve that? Secondly, was to make sure that the team was bought into the trial, and also some of the trade-offs behind potentially working a 4-day week. We wanted to be really clear with people that there were really good things about this, but there were some things that would be less good, or compromises we had to make it work. And we wanted to make sure everyone was on board with that, so that we could all lean into the trial and make it a success. Thirdly, we wanted to make sure we got all the best possible benefits from the 4-day week, all the stuff that I was talking about at the beginning in terms of benefits to employee well-being, productivity, energy, and so on. And finally, being able to deliver that operational shift. Joe's talked about those 3 goals around shifting responsibility, restructuring our teams, and so on. We want to be able to use this to effectively do that. So that's what we tried to achieve in this 4-month preparation phase. And these are the 5 things that we did. So firstly, we set out our goals and success criteria. We wanted to make sure that it was really unambiguous from the start what success looked like, and that we would be able to evaluate that in a very kind of dispassionate way at the end. And we created the criteria around the 3 parts of our Forward Actions mission, which is kind of defined in our organizational strategy. So the first part of our mission is delivering progressive impact with our partners. We work with them to ultimately try and make the world a better place and improve people's lives. And that is the primary reason that Forward Action exists. And so our key goal around that, obviously, was that the team and partners, particularly partners, didn't feel that they were getting a worse standard of service, or our quality of our work had dropped from a 4-day week. That was fundamental. And at the same time, we wanted to be able to deliver our work faster rather than slower. So if you're no longer working Fridays, you've got a choice. When do you deliver the work you're going to do on a Friday? Do you do it on the Monday afterwards, or you do it on the Thursday? And we decided we were going to do it on the Thursday. So we needed to be able to get 5 days of work done in 4 and actually deliver things faster for partners, which would improve the quality of our service to them. And finally, it was also really important that costs didn't increase for partners at all. That is part of our impact, that we are good value to partners, and that the amount they pay us, they get that back in terms of the impact we can create for them. And so we didn't want cost to increase at all. Secondly, our mission goal around being financially sustainable, so that we can carry on having impact for a long time. Fairly simply, we just needed to hit our income targets. We have income targets to make sure we can pay our staff. And we needed to hit those during the trial, which meant doing enough of those billable hours at the right rate that Joe was talking about. And finally, our third mission area is around being a kind of enriching, empowering, happy place to work. And the key measure of that was support for the 4-day week from the team. So we wanted the vast majority of the team to see the positive benefits of the trial to the extent that they wanted to make a 4-day week permanent. Okay, so once we'd set those criteria, we then had run some consultations with the team around the trade-offs we would need to make this work. And there were 3 in particular that we wanted to emphasize. So firstly, delivering that extra billable hour per day would potentially mean that working days were more intense. It was less sort of internal time, breathing space between partner-facing work. Secondly, that we sometimes partners need to respond to emergencies. Sometimes there's a tech problem that we need to be able to respond to, or ads need to be shut down because of a news story. And we needed to be able to respond to that on Friday, so that we were going to have to set up some kind of on-call system that we would share across the team. We wanted people to be clear that they would need to be part of that. And thirdly, in order to ensure that costs didn't go up for partners, we do need to take a smaller pay rise in 2023 than we otherwise would. So this was particularly an issue for us because we had roughly half of our team working part-time, that suddenly their pay would go up overnight because they were being paid full-time equivalent salaries rather than kind of 80% pro rata salaries. And so to offset that cost increase, everyone would need to take a smaller pay rise. And in fact, the leadership team took an even smaller pay rise than the rest of the team. And we were aware that this would potentially impact people differently, particularly during a time of a cost of living crisis. And those on lower salaries, they may be less able to take on a smaller pay rise. So we ran some sessions for people to ask questions. They could do that anonymously as well if they preferred. We had a way day session just to talk this through. And again, we ran an anonymous survey to ask people if they're in favor of the trial. And we had 100% people vote in favor. So that was a really strong starting point. We could be confident we had buy-in from the team to do this. There was a lot of positivity around it. Okay, Joe's going to talk through the more operational changes we made.
Yeah, so once we got buy-in from the team, we then went through a process with them of figuring out how we get that extra billable hour per day on average. And we got that extra hour basically by implementing 3 different things. We adopted lean working, which is to focus on the value and impact that we deliver for partners. We restructured the team to remove those silos and wasted time and centralized planning that I was talking about. And we also empowered those smaller teams to take more responsibility over their work, which addressed that other issue around shared responsibility. So lean working, for those of you who are new to it, it started at Toyota as a manufacturing process. And what it does is it focuses on defining the value that you're delivering for the customer. And obviously, if you're a nonprofit, that's not, you have to think about what that actually is. But you define that value very clearly, and then you empower your team to constantly figure out how to deliver that value, higher quality, less waste, and quicker, basically. For us, lean working, we decided to adopt it for 3 reasons. One is that it puts that partner value and impact central to the organization. It always has been. We wanted to make sure that that was the case as we were making such big changes and thinking about the way that we do our work. The second is that it really is not something that Alex and I can just swoop in and say, okay, well, now you're all working lean because we've made these changes. It works because we are empowering the team. We give them permission and responsibility to make those changes themselves, to remove waste, to simplify, streamline the processes that they're doing. And the transition to the 4-day week really, I think, aligned our interests in, or like our objective of trying to make that streamlining with the team. Like the team could very clearly understand why that change needed to happen. And I think that alignment worked really well. And then the final thing that we thought that lean would do really well is continuous improvement. So you could see a scenario whereby you make these changes to become leaner for the 4-day week, you hit your extra billable hour per day, and then over time, as the organization changes, people come and go, you know, over time, process can start to creep back in, and inefficiency can start to creep back in, and you could in theory end up in a scenario where you are doing everything as you were in the 5-day week, but you now have a 4-day week, which is a challenge. So what we thought worked really well about lean is that really embeds continuous improvement. It's not something that you do once and then it stop. It's constant. And you know, I was thinking about this yesterday. All the time people are talking about lean, whether what they're doing is lean, whether any changes that we're making are lean. And the 4-day week so far has really brought that home to people of, I don't have time to do this. As if it were a 5-day week, I need to figure out how to do it as leanly as possible. So that's why we introduced lean. How did we apply it? We sat down with the team weekly in the run up to the 4-day week for 3 months, I think it was, in the run up to the 4-day week, to figure out what lean changes we could make within that framework, and how we could implement those in our work. And that took there were a number of different ways in which we did that. The first was organizational level changes, where it became clear that we were doing lots of the same thing across the entire organization in slightly different ways, which was quite wasteful. So we did things like standardizing our data reporting. There were also team level changes where teams themselves sat down and said, okay, well, we do this regularly. How can we improve the quality of it? How can we improve the reliability of it or the speed of it? And for example, our tech team changed their QA processes to make them more effective. We looked at our internal time, and that was a really big one as well. We sat down and we basically said, if we're going to do an extra billable hour per day, per person, how much internal time do we actually have left? How much time do we have left for internal time? And how do we make the most of that time? What are our objectives for that internal time? And so we prioritize things like the small teams having daily stand-ups to organize their work, or having a weekly headspace session where people can drop in and do a headspace session together. We prioritize that over things like unnecessary meetings or policy. We used to have employment policy committees, which would sit down and write employment policies together. We've changed the way that we do that so that we get team input, but we don't need to do it by committee, which is much more efficient with that limited internal time. And then the final thing is that continuous improvement. Those weekly sessions really embedded lean as a continuous improvement, a continuous process that we go through. So alongside lean, we also reshaped our teams, and that also reduced a significant amount of coordination time, planning time, and was a real driver in allowing us to get our billable hour. So I've talked about this earlier about having the silos and having lots of coordination and communication, and lots of centralized planning. Here's the old structure that I was talking about. You had the creative team, the strategy team, and there were lots of levels within those. The new structure was 4 small multifunctional teams where each team member can do a wider range of the tasks that the team needs to do. And we have these internal experts, which are sort of like floating expertise to like jump in and micro engage on specific issues to improve the quality of our work. So what we did by removing those silos is that those teams of 3 now deliver almost all the work on the projects that they're doing. They take decisions about how much work to take on, when to plan it, how to schedule it. Previously, that was all done centrally by me. I think we did a calculation, which was, whilst I was doing central capacity planning, we were spending about £60,000 a year on full team meetings to figure out how to assign different work to different people, because it was so complex. And we just got rid of that. These smaller teams manage that themselves. They do that planning themselves. And as a result of that redistribution and that reshaping of the teams, we were able to redistribute power and responsibility to the different teams. Could I get the next slide, please? So those project teams, those smaller multifunctional project teams, were the perfect space for us to push down power and responsibility. We set them a really, really clear, clear objective, which was to deliver enough work and to deliver it on scope. And what that basically did was we simultaneously empowered them to take ownership of the work that they were doing, to plan it out, deliver it as they wanted, to structure it as they wanted, divide it up between themselves as they wanted, as long as they were hitting that objective. And we can hold them to account for doing that. And that's making them responsible for some of the financial stability part of the business, and it's also empowering them. And I think that the feedback that we've had from the team is that is a much more joyful way of doing it. From our perspective, it's meant that planning is a lot better. It's also meant that teams are able to take initiative in ways that we wouldn't have previously expected. And most importantly, it saves a ton of time in terms of planning and coordinating, which in part gets us that extra billable hour per day. Here you can see a couple of quotes from different team members about the new team structure. I think it's taken a little bit of getting used to for some people, but I think once people got the head around the idea that they have the freedom to make decisions that were previously made for them, they have the permission and space to do that, they really picked that up and ran with that. Oh, no, I'm doing this, aren't I? So once we'd like reshaped the team, once we'd pushed down responsibility, and once we'd adopted the lean working and gone through that process, we decided on some of the practicalities. We were going to do the trial for 3 months, at least to start with, to give it enough time to see how it would work. We would change, as Alex said, it's not compressed hours. We would do 30 hours over 4 days. We decided that everyone would work the same days. That's Monday to Thursday, because we felt having lots of collaboration and having those smaller teams being able to work together more effectively would be ruined if we had different people on at different times. But the flip side of that is that we have an on-call system for Friday emergencies, which is the phone number which the team can respond to. We also wanted to be nimble and adapt to feedback as we went. We always said this is a trial, we'll take feedback, we'll tweak and improve it as we go. It's not reasonable to expect that we'll nail this first time. And so we were surveying the team anonymously every 2 weeks. We surveyed partners anonymously halfway through, and we looked at the financial and operational data each month. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. I think it's worth saying we wanted to go into some of the sort of financial and operational detail around this. Obviously, a lot of it isn't very directly mirrored if you're not an agency, but I think there are themes in there which will probably be recognizable to quite a lot of people around excessively complex organizational structures, silos, decision-making as a result needing to be top down, and hopefully the benefit of pushing the ability for teams to make decisions, building cross-functional teams and so on. I imagine that for a lot of you, there'll be some kind of themes that are relevant there, even if you're not yourselves working at agencies. Okay, cool. So how did the trial go? In short, it went really well. We are pretty confident that we hit all 5 of our goals. And as a result, based on that success, we have extended the trial to the end of 2023 so that we can get a full year's worth of financial data around this to account for fluctuations throughout the year, around Christmas, for example. And our assumption at the moment, unless something drastically changes, is that we will make the 4-day week permanent at the end of that based on how well it's gone so far. So I'm just going to run through the data we collected from our bi-weekly surveys and then the surveys at the end of the trial of the team, and also our surveys to partners to illustrate those goals. So this is the kind of primary question around, would you be in favor of making it a 4-day week permanent? Our criteria is that more than 75% of the team said yes to that. This obviously shows that it was 100% throughout. I realize this looks like a kind of Putin-run election, but I promise we didn't rig this. This is actually how people felt. So it was kind of universal support of the 4-day week throughout the trial. And that reflected that the vast majority of the team found that it had a really positive impact on their experience at work. And amongst those who were reporting no change, a number of them were already working 4 days a week, so it had less of an impact on them. But on the whole, people reported a really positive impact. And the quotes, the qualitative feedback we collected represented what we kind of would have expected and really hoped to see. So a lot of people, I won't read this all out, I'll let you read them, but a lot of people reporting improvements to their well-being, their mental health, their productivity, their energy at work, their ability to push through busy days and get a lot done in a short space of time, being more prepared to take on responsibility. It was very striking how kind of widespread this feedback was and how consistent it was throughout the trial. So it seemed to last from start to finish. It wasn't something that people got in the first month and then got bored of. We also wanted to keep on top of whether people were actually able to get all their work done in 4 days, or whether they were having to do work on days off more than they were before. So we had roughly just over a quarter of the team saying that they were doing a little bit more work on Fridays and weekends than they were before the trial started. No one said that they were doing it significantly more at the end of the trial. And the qualitative feedback we collected from that on people was that essentially there were some of those trade-offs that we thought there might be. For some people, their weeks became more busy, more intense. Some people were having to do a little bit more work on the weekends or on Fridays than they perhaps would have before, which is something we've always tried to avoid. But their own judgment was those trade-offs were definitely on balance outweighed by the benefits of the 4-day week. So even though there were some negatives, the positives were more important, and that's why they're in favor of keeping it. So that's the team's facing experience, kind of universally positive across the board, more or less, and gave us very clear mandates from the team side to carry on with the 4-day week. On the partner side, we asked a couple of questions. So the first was, how has the 4-day week impacted quality of work and the standard of service we've given you? Thank you, anyone who's on the call who responded to this. The feedback was really helpful and crucial for us to assess how this went. So you can see here, the vast majority of partners reported no change, which is what we were expecting and looking for. We're presently surprised that some partners felt that it had actually made our work better. And when we've surveyed at the midpoint, at the end of the trial, there was one partner in each survey who gave us some really helpful feedback around where they actually felt it had made things worse, that I'll come on to in a moment. The second question we asked was a fairly direct one around, is this actually going to have an impact on whether you want to keep working with us? So obviously, if a lot of people said, actually, it's great you're doing a 4-day week, but we don't want to keep working with you whilst you do it, that would have been a real problem. And so again, we're really pleased to see that actually of those who responded, half said it wouldn't make a difference, half said actually make them more likely to work with us, either because they'd seen improvements in the quality of the work, or because they felt it reflected well on us as an organization living our values, and that's something they wanted to be aligned with, which is really great. And this is actually not a benefit that we'd really anticipated before. So this is some of the feedback that some partners shared. So key points were around essentially it was an issue because we were communicating it clearly, and so they knew what to expect. Some people saying actually they felt that their team they were working with had become kind of healthier, happier, more energy, and so that meant they were getting better service ultimately, and also that they're really happy that we were doing this and hope that other people would follow our lead. On the kind of critical feedback side, the points that were made there were really helpful. Essentially, they were isolated to cases where on one project, for example, a partner was really struggling with stakeholder sign-off on their side. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that challenge. And so the timelines got really compressed towards the end, and what should have been sort of 3 or 4 day turnaround times suddenly needed to be 1 day turnaround times. And so then us not being there on Friday made it more challenging for them to manage that. The second feedback was similarly around, we had a very tight timeframe project, and sometimes the partner wouldn't anticipate something they needed on a Friday, and so they would have benefited from having us around to answer that. So we're thinking about how we can best mitigate that, whether that's through a slight change to the on-call system, for example. So if the partner really does need us on Friday, they feel more able to access us, and we might change the definition of what constitutes emergency. But on the whole, we felt that the balance of feedback from partners was sufficiently positive to have the confidence to say that from the partner's perspective, we were comfortable to carry this on, and on the whole, the support from partners was really, really great, and a lot of solidarity. So again, thank you, any partners on the call for that. Okay, finally, our financial data. So we did hit our income target. We did enough billable hours at the right rate, and we did 106% of our income target. So it's fairly straightforward, and that was fine. So what was pleasing about this as well is it matched, and in some cases actually exceeded, but it was a similar pattern to what organizations who took part in the UK-wide trial reported. So this is some of the data from that trial. Employees involved in it reporting a decrease in burnout, stress, sleep difficulties. And the vast majority of organizations who took part, over 90%, are continuing with the 4-day week in some format, whether that's extending the trial or around 30% have actually already made it permanent. So yeah, our experience is essentially not isolated. It seems to be the more common experience from organizations who've tried this, that it's been really positive for them. Okay, finally, what we learned, and then we'll give you a chance to answer a few questions, ask you a few questions. So there are 5 key takeaways, I think, from this. Firstly, it's more possible than you might think. I think our initial response to this being raised was there's just no way it could work for us. Like, it sounds good, but there's no way it could work for us. And I suspect that's quite a common response from organizational leaders. And actually what we found is that if we looked into it and we were prepared to look at some kind of creative solutions, that actually it did open up the possibility of doing it. And the reason we were able to find those solutions is that we were able to define and measure what was valuable to us, what output of our work mattered. So that was essentially, can we do enough billable hours to bring in the work, but also is the partner's experience of our work good enough? You know, we were able to say those are things that matter. And so once you've got that, you can then say, right, how can we check that we're doing the same amount in 4 days as we are in 5? What solutions can we put in to make that possible? That's a really important step. And I realize in some situation that should never be impossible, but in some places that's a bigger conversation and more complex than it is for us. But I think that's a crucial starting point to making this work. Thirdly, it was really worthwhile planning this properly. We felt that we got so many benefits from it because we'd put the time and the work into making it, to preparing, ensuring all the plans and metrics were in place. But it is time consuming. I think it's worth being aware of that. Joe and I probably spent an average of 3 days a week between us working on this for five months, which is obviously a significant leadership time cost, one that we feel has been completely paid back, but it's something that's worth being aware of, that you shouldn't sort of half bake this. You need to put the time in to make it work. Fourthly, we really found that we were almost surprised at how successful this was as a tool for driving that change that Joe was talking around structure and culture and so on. I sort of think of it now as it's almost this once in a century tool you've been offered, you know, change you can make once every 100 years to change your team's working pattern. And what do you want to achieve with that? You can achieve some really big things with that. And I think that's a huge opportunity for organizational leadership. The most important stuff here is around the team well-being and the benefits to that, but you can achieve things with this outside of that too, which I think is a really important perspective for those at the top thinking about why they might want to do this. And finally, as a lot of people reported, it can just be a massive game changer for team well-being and morale, and we definitely saw that. And it's led to huge benefits that have entirely justified the time spent running the trial. That's it. So we'll hand over to you for questions. I would suggest if you're interested in hearing more about this, that you get in touch with Stella. Here's her email address. If you want to know what it's like, for someone working within a 4-day week organization, not just the leadership, she can talk about that. If you want any tips or advice in it around your own organization, she'll be happy to pass those on. And I also think Stella is going to send round this and a blog that we're going to write for you to share with senior leaders at your organization if you'd like to, if you want to be making the case for a 4-day week at your organization. And she's also very happy to speak to them about what it's been like for us and help them work through whether it's something they should consider. So yeah, definitely do get in touch with Stella for your 4-day week chat. You may be aware, and I think Joe mentioned it earlier, Joe and I are actually leaving Forward Action in a week. And we are still working out what we're going to do next. But one of the options we're loosely considering is actually helping other organizations trial this ourselves because the experience of Forward Action has been so good. So if you're interested in a few months down the line in maybe having a conversation about that and how we can support you if you're starting to think about trying your organization, feel free to get in touch. Our email address is there. But get in touch with Stella first. She is far more interesting. Thank you. That's it. And if you're any of you on the call are partners, I can see a few names that I recognize that Joe and I worked with in the past. Just a big thank you for everything at Forward Action, and you've all been wonderful to work with. It's been a lovely experience, and we'll miss you. But on to questions. Stella.
We should do just a leaving webinar. This is actually a nice way to go out, I think, because this is probably I've only worked with Forward Action for a few months, but I hear from everyone else, and I experience it myself, how much of an impact this change has actually made just on people's, like you said, motivation, commitment, but also energy that people bring into work. So I think it's a great way to go out to share this with everyone. We've had quite a lot of questions. Just to reassure you all that if we don't get through them, we'll write them up on the blog anyway, so there will be written answers to your questions. Some of them are quite specific, so it might be that we want to get in touch with you maybe individually, so we'll try and kind of recognize who you are. But I'll kick us off with a question that a couple of people asked around the day that we chose to have off and whether you considered team members having different days off. So for example, somebody says that, they're likely to need staff cover in the office for 5 days a week because of the nature of the service, like service facing. I think organizations will have that maybe kind of consideration. And so they wondered whether it would work with people working on different days.
Yes, definitely. That's a good question. So I don't see why it wouldn't. And I think other organizations that have done this have done that model. As Joe said, the trade-offs we considered there are, on the one hand, doing that way of doing it in that way means you have cover throughout the week. On the other hand, getting everyone on the same day means you have better scope for collaboration. And it's just what was more important to us as an organization. We felt it was collaboration and that we could manage the extra day through an on-call system, but definitely don't see why it couldn't work. And I also think there are other ways of actually doing a similar thing to this that aren't just the 4-day week. So some organizations, for example, have trialed reduced hours, reduced working days. So 30 hours across 5 days, for example. Like, this isn't the only way to achieve some of these goals.
I would also just add to that what we did here is we started with a blank sheet of paper and said, how can we make this work for our organization, delivering enough value for us as an organization? And I saw some of the questions there about if you have a venue and that needs to be open 6 or 7 days a week. It's like the process isn't just, can we do this on 4 days? Let's take a step back and figure out how we can deliver this value whilst achieving some of the other goals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This question is maybe linked to that a little bit. So this person is saying that they're trying to work out how it practically works if you don't have a full-time staff team already. So some people already are doing reduced hours. And I know that was the case for Forward Action with some people working 4-day weeks already. So how would it work for them? Should they reduce everyone by 0.8, give some people who are already on a 4-day week a 20% pay rise? Like, how did you deal with that? How did you navigate that?
Yeah, that was a key issue for us because so many of our team were already part-time. So everyone went up to a full-time equivalent salary. So those who were currently being paid 80% went up to 100%. For the leadership team, that actually was only up to 90%. That's where the leadership team, as I mentioned, took a more of a kind of pay cut. They ended up with a pay rise overall, but it was less than the rest of the team in order to make the finances work. But yes, everyone ends up on the same salary. Because now everyone's working 4 days and it's a full-time salary. So the way we handled that was that leadership team taking some of the burden and also just a smaller pay rise. So everyone is at Forward Action now paid slightly less than they would be if we were 5 days, but in terms of per day worked, it's like 23% higher. So.
Excellent. Great. Somebody asked if there was a change to our benefit package and particularly looking at holiday allowance.
So what we did was we kept holidays as essentially we prorated the holiday allowance. So I think we went from 25 to 20 days of holiday per year. We didn't keep 25 because obviously that then becomes many more weeks of holiday. That was part of the trade-off, I think, that was inherent within that.
That makes, yeah. And I think it makes a lot of, like, it works because we have, with a 1 day off you have every week anyway, you can essentially take the holiday you would normally take as well. Somebody had a clarification around our billable hours. So how many billable hours per day did each person work before adding an extra one?
That varies on role, actually. So some people have more time they have to spend on internal stuff like line management or doing new business work, for example, so on. So it varied from 5, for example, down to some members of the team who are very internally focused who would just do a couple. So for those who, for now, some members of staff is doing 6. So that allows roughly half an hour a day or so for planning. Across the week, it allows an hour or so for like one-to-ones and then other things. And it just kind of, it builds up on top of that. But 6 out of 7.5 hours a day is on billable time, which is 75% for those members of staff, as an example.
Right, excellent. So this question we thought might need a longer answer, but you'll tell us what you think. So this person says that they're at the early stages of considering a trial, but they have 2 main blockers. The first one is that they're a homeless charity that tenders in bids for contracts, and they're concerned that a 4-day week would make them less competitive in tendering in terms of an increased hourly wage for staff. And the second one is that they're worried that if the trial doesn't work, they will then be asking people to take a pay cut. And I think this kind of challenge of the tendering, and what kind of how much people get paid per hour is probably a challenge that quite a few of our partners, or some of our partners, definitely face. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I can try and enjoy, obviously, I don't think 6.6 hours out of 7.5 is 80%. Sorry, not 75. It's 9 a.m. maths there. Yes, so I think I'm not familiar with how tendering processes work, but I think the key thing is to emphasize that your goal needs to be that you can do the same amount in 4 days as you were in 5. So from that tender application, you're not saying pay us, £10,000 and you'll get 80% of what you're going to get from this other organization. It's pay us £10,000, you're going to get the same amount. We're just going to do it in a different way. So I think really focusing on the output rather than the input, if that makes sense, what you're achieving and not just the presenteeism of the hours you're doing is really important. Joe, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, I wouldn't. I'd say that we're both happy to talk to this more directly after this call or at another time, if that would be helpful. And then the second thing, in terms of if the trial doesn't work, I think we were very clear at the start about two different steps at which we would, well, three different steps at which we'd make a decision to. One is, we want to trial a four-day week from January. These are the things we think we need to have in place to run the trial, and being very clear with the team about that, getting team buy-in, and then having a decision point, say November, December, where we're like, okay, well, we think these things are in place. If those things hadn't been in place, we'd have kicked it back a few months to then say, okay, well, how do we get those things in place? And then the second part of that is, at the end of the trial, having those unambiguous success metrics where you can then say, this is either working or it's not working. And if it's not working, we were very clear at the start that we're going to roll this back, and leaving that door open so that you're managing the risk to the organization. I think that's all you can do when trialing this.
Great, thank you. And Alison, who asked that question, if you feel free to get in touch with us directly, like our email address is on the screen, as you know, but we think that's obviously an interesting question. I think we only have time for one more. And as I mentioned earlier, we will make sure that we answer all of them in the blog. So don't worry if your question hasn't been answered. How do you avoid people working on Fridays, regardless of the 4-day week? So this is a question that this person is saying they keep being asked because some staff members believe that no one should ever work on weekends. So how do we keep people from working on their days off?
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's something we're concerned about, which is why we measured it throughout. I mean, the primary answer is, it comes back to giving people actually ownership over their time. Like, we make it clear as an organization that that is not something we expect or want. And that if people find that they're having to do that regularly, that's something that they should be flagging with their line managers, and then we can help them sort it out. But ultimately, we give people their ownership over their time. We give them the goals. We let them work out how they hit those and how they manage their partnerships. And what we found is some people said, I'd just rather log on for half an hour on Friday and just do a bit. And then I feel like I'm in a better place and I'm happy to do that. And I'm still really pro the 4-day week. So actually, I think that ownership and empowerment is probably the best way to deal with it, rather than being trying to be too top down.
Yeah, I think that's it. Excellent. So I don't think we'll have time to fit in more questions, but there are some more. So Alex and Joe will be sending those your way, and you can do some thinking, and then we'll write up some answers and add them to the blog. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning, and thank you for your very interesting questions. It's so great to see that there's interest out there in a 4-day week. Look out for an email with the recording of the session, including our tech issues at the beginning, so you can enjoy those as well when you watch it back, and the write-up of our blog and the questions. And once we send it to you, get in touch if you want to have any further conversations about this, and make sure you share it with people in your organization who might be in a position to make a decision on this. And we're very happy to talk to anyone about how to trial it, how to put some building blocks in place to give the 4-day week a go. Have lovely days, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.